Do you believe that love is a gift from God, or it comes from God, such as conscience would?
If there is no God, you don't have free will. You're just a biochemical reaction, and you're just responding to the influences of your environment. My experience of life is love is real. I can love you or I can hate you. I can work for your well-being or I can seek to manipulate you and use you.
I would disagree with it and insist that even if love is a biochemical reaction, it can still obtain free will because, although possibly evolutionary it may have arisen, in the current modern era, now that we live rather than survive as humans, we can make our own cognitive decisions to love who we decide and not love who we decide not to.
First point, if there is no God, we're limiting reality. We're limiting reality to matter and energy. There's no God, meaning by that, there's no personal being that pre-existed the human being. So all of reality is matter and energy. And my point is that if that's true, if all of reality is matter and energy, there is no such thing as love. There's a biochemical response that we might call love, but there is no free decision that I make to care for him, to forgive him, to help him. Instead, I am programmed by my chemicals, which means if I kick his face in, it's not me, it's just my biochemical reaction led me to kick his face in. And if I, quote, love him and am generous to him, there's not a me who's freely choosing that. I just have a biochemical reaction, influences of my environment, I'm a machine, and so that's what I do. You can't live it out.
How come?
Because if she says to you, I love you, you don't interpret that to mean, well, you're excited, your sex glands, lady, are excited by me and how macho I am and handsome I am. No, you interpret that to mean she chooses to love you. Don't you? Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm freely choosing to care about you, to love you.
In the modern era, since we are the only species who has an evolved brain high enough to think on their own, that we have that free will to say, I love you, regardless of whatever social construct we've depicted.
Okay. What is I when you say, I would say I love you?
Your brain.
Your brain. A chemical reaction?
Absolutely.
Good. Which means there's no you that freely chooses to do anything. It's your chemical reaction that programs you to do whatever it is you're doing, right?
Can you not create those chemical reactions?
Pardon?
Can you not create or generate those chemical reactions?
Did you create you?
I create my thoughts and my decisions.
I thought your thoughts were just simply the result of the chemicals in your brain organizing in a certain way.
Correct, but if I lift my arm, that is my own decision rather than a mechanical reaction.
Okay, but once again, what do you mean when you say my own decision? There's nothing more than material reality. So when you say I chose to lift my arm, what I think a more accurate statement from your worldview would be the chemicals in my mind program me to raise my hand. So I raised it. In other words, there's no I, there's no you, there's no me if there is no God. They're highly complex biochemical reactions, not all of which we understand, obviously. But you see, when you say there is no God, you got to think what that means. It means you are limiting reality to matter and energy. There's no soul, there's no spirit. There's just chemicals, matter, and energy. B.F. Skinner, the great psychologist who taught at Harvard, pointed that out. That's why he taught behaviorism, which is you behave the way you do because of the influences of your environment. Your environment has programmed you to do it, and because of the chemicals in your brain. And that's why there's no you, there's no me, there's a complex chemical reaction. And what was fascinating, there was a brilliant MIT student who said, Cliff, you're absolutely right, but I think that the more science we do, we're going to begin to realize that indeed it is possible for chemicals to create a free will. I strongly disagree. Why? Because if you say there is no God, you are limiting reality. And I'm going to hold you to be consistent with what you say you believe. So if you say there's no God and it's all just chemicals, how can there be a me? How can there be a you? There's an it. I'm an it, and you're an it, and we all are its, but we're not human beings with soul, free will, personhood, love, conscience. It doesn't exist.
I would say that the human dictionary definition of I and me does not have to inquire a soul. So when I refer to myself, I refer to my vessel.
Your vessel.
My vessel, my brain, my own personality.
If there is no God, there's no personal being who created you and gave you the ability to love, a free will, a conscience that enables you to say, this is right and this is wrong. I don't care how many of you guys think abusing an innocent child is right. I'm convinced it's absolutely wrong. And the only way there can be a moral absolute is if there is some mind prior to the human mind who defines right and wrong. Otherwise, majority opinion rules, culture rules, or the intellectual elite, or the guys who have the guns, the power, they rule, and they'll tell us what's right and wrong. And you see, I'm saying my observation of reality is, I don't care how many guns you have behind you, if you're going to try and tell me that to abuse an innocent child is good, I'm going to say, I'm sorry, you're wrong. Because I'm convinced that good and evil are not defined by the individual or the power elite or the majority. I'm convinced it's a real value, an intangible, non-physical, non-material value of justice. See, I can't show you a foot of love, right? I can't show you a pound of justice and put it in a test tube and say, okay, here's justice. Those are non-material, non-physical values, aren't they?
Speaking on moral relativity, that concept is highly rejected outside of Christianity as well, because it could possibly be made up from evolution to help with human fitness throughout evolution's process. Now, why do we react different from animals who may kill the weaker? Because we were developed with a brain distinct from different animals. We have the ability to cognitively think. So when it comes to moral relativity, I would insist it is objective, and everyone agrees on that, and it could arrive from evolution rather than a God to be that absolute higher form of morality.
If my brain is simply a highly developed monkey's brain, I'm not going to trust my brain to tell me the truth about reality. See, Einstein was onto something when Einstein said, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that we can comprehend it. See, if the universe is an accident, and if my brain is an accident, do you know how unlikely it would be that I, by exercising this brain, could get in touch with the reality of the universe? I mean, that is such a blind leap, it's incredible, Einstein's pointing out. If your brain, well, just think about it this way. Is it more rational to believe that that reason comes from non-reason, or is it more reasonable to believe that reason comes from reason? And an atheist is saying, I believe that reason comes from non-reason. I, as a theist, am saying it's far more reasonable for me to believe that this rational mind comes from a rational mind than it is for me to say reason comes from non-reason.
I would like to insist that I am a Christian, and I'm taking on the thought process of an atheist right now.
Good.
So that atheists can learn from this argument.
Good. Very good.
When it comes to creation, just as you can assume God has no beginning, as he is outside of time, I believe you like to refer to, and perhaps the fourth dimension, you can also insist that if chance were to happen, regardless of how abysmal, given enough time, it is inevitable.
is it more reasonable? Not can I prove. I can't prove anything. The question for me is not what can you prove. The question for me is what is more reasonable? Is it more reasonable for me to believe that this complex I, which puts that camera to shame, self-assembled by luck? Or is it more reasonable to believe that behind the complexity of this I, it's more reasonable for me to believe there's an intelligent mind? Guys, for me, it's a no-brainer. Why? Because I tried really hard at Davidson College in North Carolina to get a high GPA. I didn't. I tried really hard at Davidson College in North Carolina to play basketball. I just barely made the team. Every game I had a good seat to watch everybody else play. Why? Because to get a ball to go through a hoop that's 10 feet off the ground doesn't happen by accident, guys. It takes amazing thought, amazing coordination to get a little stinking basketball to go through a hoop 10 feet off the ground. And if you've played ball, you know what I'm talking about. And you also know that to get a high GPA doesn't happen by accident. And you don't get A's on exams by just going to the exam and allowing the real you to flow out all of the paper. The real you will flunk. You've got to study and develop your mind to get in touch with reality.
Do you have doubt in God?
Absolutely yes. Every time that I sin, it shows that I doubt. And plus, not just because of my stubborn will, but because of my intellect, I doubt. I've never audibly heard the voice of God. I've never physically touched God. So I've got plenty of doubts at different times. But guess what I've been doing with my doubts? Exactly what I've just been doing with you. I mean, if you have doubts, you can't say, oh, I doubt, therefore God doesn't exist. You can't say, oh, I doubt, therefore Jesus didn't rise from the dead. No, if you've got doubts, be honest and go study the evidence. And if the evidence is there is no God, then don't believe in God, because the evidence doesn't support it. But if the evidence points to God's existence, follow the evidence. Put your faith in Him. If the evidence is Jesus Christ did not rise from the dead, don't believe He rose from the dead. But if the historical evidence is He really did die, He really was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, and 3 days later He really did rise from the dead, and over a period of 40 days He really did appear to over 500 people, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15, who saw Him risen from the dead, then follow the evidence. I mean, guys, that's the way we live our lives. I don't think you came to OSU because you thought it was the worst university on the planet. I think the majority of you came to OSU because the evidence was it was the best university for you at your academic place in life, in terms of your interests of study. And so the evidence is OSU is good, and that's why you're at OSU. I mean, isn't that the way you guys live your lives? I mean, it's the way I live my life. It's got to be evidence. I can't prove to you that OSU is the best university for you. But the evidence is it's an incredibly fine university, and that's why you're studying here.
I don't understand why it would be such a leap of faith, in your perspective, to follow the Big Bang if you can recognize evidence leading to it just as you can for creation through God. It is almost as if both are buying a lottery ticket when you know the chances are rather good.
Do you think I believe in the Big Bang? I do. Why? Because the evidence is there was a beginning. And that's exactly what the Big Bang is teaching. The Big Bang is saying the universe is not eternal. There is a beginning. Well, that's exactly what I, as a follower of Christ, believe. The universe is not eternal. There was a beginning. Who discovered the Big Bang? George Lemaitre, who was a Belgian Catholic priest, was one of the initial people who described the Big Bang. And when Albert Einstein heard George Lemaitre give a lecture on the Big Bang, Einstein walks out of the lecture saying, that is the most incredible description of the origin of the universe I've ever heard. And Arno Penzias in the 1960s, a brilliant scientist, begins to study background noise of the universe and say, yeah, the Big Bang is true. Well, guess what, guys? Arno Penzias was a committed follower of Christ. So you got two guys who are the chief proponents of discovering and articulating the Big Bang, George Lemaitre and Arno Penzias, who are deeply committed followers of Christ. Now, once again, look at Einstein. Einstein was a pantheist before the Big Bang. He thought that nature is God, that nature is eternal. When he begins to realize, if the Big Bang is true, it means that my pantheism is wrong, the universe is not eternal, the universe is not God, and there is a creator. He was so disturbed by that, he participated in a deception. Mathematically, he proved that the Big Bang could not happen. The only problem was he cheated in his math equation, and he was exposed. And I appreciate Einstein being honest enough to say, you're right. I put that fudge factor into my equation because I knew that if the evidence is the Big Bang took place, there's got to be a God behind it all. There's got to be some type of God, some type of mind. Well, I love it. I love that. It's incredible. I mean, Cliff, you're really weird. You get excited about some pretty weird things, you know. Well, I'm sorry, man. When you look at evidence like that and you watch people try and massage the evidence and change it to suit their worldview, and then they're exposed and they admit it, I mean, gosh, that's pretty exciting.
That's when you know you've won.
Well, and you know that the evidence is, consistently, some type of God exists. Obviously, the Big Bang says nothing about Jesus, and obviously so many of the parts of the discussion we've been having is more evidence for some type of God, has nothing to do with Jesus at this point. But then obviously the next logical question is, well, who is this God? Who is the Creator? And that's what Jesus claims to be. He claims to be the Creator opening up and revealing who He really is.
I sit at a spot where I'm kind of between not believing, but I'm not opposed to believing in God. But I feel like I don't have enough proof myself that I can wholeheartedly believe it. And one question I have is, if God is this all-powerful being that exists beyond whatever we can conceive, if He is omnipotent, why does He seek to be loved by others? If He is omnipotent, why does He have as I believe you said, a human emotion?
Yep.
That being the need for love, or want for love.
God has not decided not to give you enough evidence, or me enough evidence of His existence. But it is the way He chose to do it. It's not the way I chose to do it. It's not going to be the way you chose to do it. I mean, I would like pyrotechnic fireworks myself from God. That would really help me a lot grow in faith. But God chooses not to give me those pyrotechnic fireworks. Instead, God chooses to give me a rational mind. He creates a very orderly universe. He gives me the ability to experience love. He gives me the innate drive for meaning and purpose in life. He gives me an innate desire for life after death. I mean, I enjoy life so much that if there is life after death, I'm interested. And that forces me to think more deeply. Where do these desires come from? Is there anything that can satisfy these desires? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, what I've said to you means that the universe is not religiously ambiguous. According to the Bible, according to Paul in Romans chapter 1, for although they knew God, they neither glorified Him as God nor gave thanks to Him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. And Paul's getting at the fact, I have an innate prejudice against God. Me, Cliff, I have an innate prejudice against God. Why? Because I want to do my thing my way. That's why I love moral relativism. Because moral relativism allows me to write the rules. So the challenge is to get beyond that, to ask myself, wait a second, Cliff, are you really sure that you're so pure as you think you are, so smart like you think you are, so loving like you think you are, or is it more accurate to say, at times I am thoughtful, at times I am loving, but at other times I'm not this great person that I wish you would believe that I am? And I think that's a more accurate assessment of me.
Some things that I hear seem a little to be roundabout and not exactly straight to the point questions, and that's usually how I try to, I guess, divide different answers, is whether or not it's a direct point or kind of roundabout. And most answers that I hear from any religious talk usually seem to be more roundabout and not a direct answer. I don't really know how else to explain it.
You've explained it very well. I think some Christians just go roundabout, don't really answer the question. I think I've done that at times, and I'm embarrassed by that. This is a very good point you make. All right. Now, I know you don't have pen and pencil, but I'm going to go down through a list of things that I go through when I struggle with doubt, and I struggle with doubt. First point, non-existence does not produce existence. And yet an atheist, a person who is agnostic, is saying, oh no, I think non-existence produces existence. There's no God, no creator, there's non-existence before the Big Bang, and now all of a sudden we've got existence. Are you kidding me? Non-existence producing existence is a miracle. It requires a miracle worker. But if you have no God, there's no miracle worker. Second point, if there is no God, chaos produces order. That's a miracle. I don't see chaos producing order. It takes an intelligent mind of some type to produce order. I don't care if it's your dress, a BMW, an articulate book, a well-answered exam. That points to intelligent mind. If you and I are walking up and down the beach and we come to John loves Mary in the sand, and you ask me, hey, Cliff, how'd that get down there? And I say, it's the waves. The waves just, they come up during high tide and it wrote John loves Mary. The reason that's so stupid of me to say is because there's too much densely packed information in John loves Mary for it to be an accident or written by the waves. So when you study the DNA of a cell, there's too much densely packed information for it to just be chance. There's got to be some type of intelligent mind behind the message of the DNA of a single cell. The third point is, so the first point is, non-existence produces existence? It takes a living, intelligent being to produce existence. Second point is, chaos produces order? Order is produced by an intelligent mind. The third point is, life produces non-life. At one time before the Big Bang, there's no life. Whoa, we got tons of life around us now. Life does not come from non-life. Life comes from life. And that helps me overcome my doubts about whether God exists, because I see plant life comes from plant life. Animal life comes from animal life. Human life comes from human life. You never, ever experience or observe life coming from non-life. It does not happen. So is it more reasonable for me to believe that there's a living being, i.e. God, before the Big Bang? Or is it more reasonable for me to believe life comes from non-life? I'm sorry, there's nothing in my observation that supports that.
My first question was, why does God want to be loved? And I don't think I got an answer.
Okay, good. God is love, which means God is a personal being. Hate to say it, but your computer does not love you, right? My computer does not love me. It takes a person to love, because love is a free decision to work for the well-being of the other person. In other words, love is the opposite of self-centeredness. It's the opposite of narcissism. Because love is a drive to share, even to sacrifice, to give to the other. Now, that is the nature, the character of God. God is love. So he creates us not as his little robots, not as his little computers. He creates us as persons for a purpose, to love him and to love each other. In other words, your body is very important. You've got a handsome, healthy body. ultimately that's a gift from God. And that's wonderful. But you see, according to the Bible, you're more than just a body. You're a soul, a person with the ability to love, a rational mind, a conscience, free will. You are amazing. You're a human being, not just a physical being.
Just one last point. When I almost lost my faith, it was because I was kind of doing what you were doing right now, which is saying Christianity has to hold up to this certain standard of perfection. People have to stop dodging certain things, and then I'll believe in it. See, that's when I became a hedonist, when I was looking at it that way. But then I started to realize, okay, wait. If I'm going to be fair, if I'm going to be an actual truth seeker and fair, I need to look at all the worldviews then and say, I'm going to hold them to the same standard. So I don't know if you're an atheist or agnostic, but I really hope you're taking your worldview and not just saying, oh, I don't know. I'm just going to poke holes in Christianity. I don't think that's fair as a truth seeker. I think if you're an honest truth seeker, you want to say, okay, fine. I'm an atheist. Now, he just brought up the soul and things like consciousness and meaning and God is love and where does love come from? So all these intangibles and the tangibles, you have to look at, hold under a microscope and say, does the atheistic worldview make sense of them more than the Christian worldview? And I know you're already doing that to a certain extent. I'm just saying there's so many atheists, though, I know, who don't do that. They just look at Christianity and say, I want to poke holes in Christianity. So for me, I was there with my existential crisis of faith, but then all of a sudden I said, whoa, this is completely unfair. What about atheism? What about hedonism, agnosticism? Last point connected to that is a worldview has to make sense from an intellectual level and an experiential, emotional, existential level. All right, what do I mean by that? Intellectual level is these tough questions of why in the world does this place seem like it's perfectly fit for human beings? Did we just pop up accidentally from a primordial soup? Those types of, can something come from nothing? You brought up the Great Crunch. All right, those are all intellectual issues. But following that, you have to deal with the experiential issues, emotional, existential, cultural issues. What do I mean by that? How does atheism make sense of justice as a value, a material value? How does atheism make sense of human rights in the sense of why would I sacrifice for somebody across the entire world who looks nothing like me, will benefit me in no kind of way? So my altruism will not benefit me in any kind of way. Consciousness, how do you get consciousness from immaterialism and materialism? And so these things, like emotionally, why do you have these drives to fill a God-shaped hole? What is that? So you have to look at it in a rounded kind of way and then come to the point of saying, all right, which worldview makes the most sense intellectually and experientially, how I experience life?
How could there be so many different denominations of it? Why is the religion so separated? And how am I supposed to know which ones are right or wrong?
All you have to do is read the New Testament, letters of Paul. I don't care if it was the church at Corinth, the church in Ephesus, the Galatian churches, the church in Ephesus, the church in Rome. Every church is going to have problems. Why? Because the church is made up of people who are sinners. And sin blinds me to the truth. I have prejudices. I have biases that I come to the Bible with. And that's sad. So the way you work through that is by praying, Lord Jesus, I want to know you, help me. Then you read. And you had better, because you're a university student, you had better ask the question, what is the way to interpret any book? Not just the Bible, but any book. And I would plead with you to interpret fairly. You respect literary style. If it's a poem, you read it as a poem. If it's history, you read it as history. If it's math, you read it as math. If it's science, you read it as science. You respect literary style. Secondly, you don't rip one line out of Shakespeare's play and say that's Shakespeare's worldview. You read the whole play through. You read in context. Then, if it's still difficult, thirdly, you study the historical context of the author. You ask, who's the author and who's the audience? Who's the author? Who's the audience? And the reason this is so important is when it comes to Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, who's the author? For the majority, not all, but for the majority of it, it's Moses. Who's the audience? Some Jews sitting in their tents, so scared about going into the promised land to kick out the Canaanites, the Philistines, the Hittites. They're not sitting in their tents asking, what scientific process did God use to create? Totally irrelevant to a bunch of Jews. So if you're going to attack Genesis with your science book in one hand and the Bible in the other, you're making a fundamental mistake. The same way, if you read the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, with the works of Shakespeare in one hand and the Bible in the other, you're making a fundamental mistake. Genesis to Deuteronomy is not scientific literature, it is not poetry, it is not a play. It has history in it, it has allegory in it, it has symbolic language in it, but it does not have science or math. So, if you're going to ask hard questions, keep asking them. That's good. Bravo. But you got to do some studying. You can't just drop it and say, okay, now who am I going to trust? The Jehovah's Witnesses or the Baptists? No. You have to do your homework. I'm sorry, you can't trust me. You have to do your homework.
So I, in the past, have had an era where I kind of had a really self-destructive, period in my life, and
Yes.
I committed a lot of sin.
Yep.
And I've repented to it a lot, and
Good.
I know that I'm forgiven.
Good.
But I'm just having a hard time with the feeling of regret, and I just want to know, for not only me but my friends at home,
Yep.
how do you use God to help you with that feeling?
Good guilt is, I did wrong. My conscience is informing me, Cliff, you did wrong. That is good. The way I deal with guilt is by turning to Christ for forgiveness. My atheist friends have no one to turn to for forgiveness because they don't have God. The reason we have guilt is because God gave us a conscience. That conscience convicts us, and I'm glad your conscience has convicted you. I'm glad it's convicted me. Because, ma'am, I can promise you I've sinned just as much, if not, I've sinned more than you. I'm 71 years old, for crying out loud. So I've sinned far more than you have, okay? But Christ has forgiven me, and I got to accept that forgiveness. Okay, now bad guilt. Bad guilt is, shoot, I lost a button off my shirt. I feel guilty. What? Guilt is you did wrong. There's nothing wrong about losing a button off your shirt. If I'm in a car accident because someone slams into me or because I make a mistake, I don't feel guilty. But if I go to sleep because I'm too tired or something, then I would feel guilty. So you got to be very careful. And remember, when you ask Christ to forgive you, He promises to forgive you. Oh, Cliff, I can't forgive myself. You don't have to forgive yourself. You don't forgive yourself. Instead, it's God who forgives you, and Christ promises that when you ask Him for forgiveness, He forgives you. Which means if you keep on feeling guilty after you've asked Christ for forgiveness, that's false guilt. Don't listen to it, kick it out. It's wrong. Stuart, what do you think?
Yeah, you should feel guilty about that guilt, really. Any psychologist is going to look at you and say, well, just learn to love yourself better. Just love yourself. I hate to pick on her, but Mel Robbins, she says, wake up in the morning and slap yourself high five in the mirror every single morning and say, hey, you're awesome. Don't feel guilty about anything. Right, is that really the way to deal with things? I think that's going to just turn this nation more and more narcissistic. So what Jesus says is, hey, look, for every one time you look at your sin, look to the cross 10 times. Look at your sin and say, I am a dirty, rotten sinner. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. We're not up here just saying, hey guys, try and get more and more and more knowledge, and then you'll be a better Christian. No, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength is simplify also. And understand, we are sinners. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Now turn to the cross and see, I better not be feeling guilty, because Jesus would not have gone to that cross if He didn't think we had a sin problem that He needed to truly save us from. But if I feel guilty, I'm saying, well, Jesus, you didn't really need to go to that cross. I'm going to feel guilty and try and fix myself. So every time you feel guilty, say, hey, I'm going to repent, and I'm only going to take 1 minute to repent, and then try and leave this guilt. And it's hard. We're stained. I get that. We are totally stained, and the devil gets in there and wants to say, hey, I'm not going to show up primarily by fangs on your back. I'm going to show up primarily by sowing seeds of lies and shame and guilt in your heart. And so confront that by going to the cross and saying, Jesus, it's by your grace. This is the only faith out there that's by a relationship with him, acknowledging that I'm a sinner and I'm going to continue to sin, but that he has saved me so I don't have to beat up on myself and I don't have to go the route of narcissism, which says, just love me better and don't worry about my guilty feelings.
I think I'm speaking for a lot of my non-believing friends when I say it seems like we are living in an era where a great area of Christian hypocrisy is our attitude towards violence. It seems like we are the first people to defend war, to defend violence, to clamor for our gun rights. I think a great example was the video from the Department of War with the Lord's Prayer over, footage of combat. And that, to me, seems to very strongly contradict Christ's teachings of loving your enemy, doing good to those who persecute you, turning the other cheek, all the verses that you cited at the beginning. So what would you say is the Christian attitude towards violence? Does it have a place in the church? Are we called to nonviolence as believers?
I would never try and persuade a pacifist to change their position, but I'm not a pacifist. Why? Because I believe in the reality of sin and evil. And if you and I walk into McDonald's and there's a guy spraying machine gun bullets into kids' bodies, if you hit him high, I hit him low, and we break his neck, that's not murder. That's killing, motivated by a drive to protect the innocent from being slaughtered. And so when I spoke at West Point last spring, it was an honor to speak to about 200 cadets over breakfast, and one of them asked that very question you've asked. He asked, I'm being trained to kill people. I'm a follower of Christ. How on earth can I do that? And I said, well, I hope that you'll never kill anybody to keep gas prices low at the pump. Instead, I hope that you will only kill someone if your government has called you to do that in order to prevent the slaughter of innocent people. So, I think you've raised a very good issue that followers of Christ disagree over. The idea that the United States formed the idea of a just war, I think, is historically incorrect. I think that there were many Christians back in the 300s and 400s and 500s who were struggling with this. Why? Because in the first century, many followers of Christ refused to fight in Caesar's wars of conquest. They would not do it. I'm glad they didn't. To be part of Caesar's wars of conquest as a follower of Christ, I find to be a contradiction. But if you're in a situation where you're trying to prevent injustice, where you're trying to stop the spread of evil, and if you use force to do that, I support you. Biblically, I think you have a case to make because evil is real, human life is valuable, evil people try and murder others, and we need to stop them. We just can't pray that they stop. Now, one of the differences between us is the following. A guy was standing beside a river. He saw a body floating down the river. He jumped in, swam to the body, grabbed him, and pulled him out of the river. It wasn't easy. He's catching his breath. He sees another guy coming down the river. He hops into the river, gets the drowning guy, pulls him onto shore. Now he's getting quite tired. But he sees a third guy floating down the river. He hops into the river, gets the guy, pulls him out. Now he's exhausted. But he sees another guy floating down the river, and so he hops in, grabs the guy, and they both drown because he's so exhausted. Okay, I respect that guy highly. But I also respect the guy who sees the body coming down the river, rescues him, and then hightails it up the river to find out what's going on upriver. And lo and behold, upriver he finds that there's a factory and that people are throwing other people into the river to drown them. And he busts into that factory and tries to stop the throwing of people into the river to drown to death. That is a different example of how we support justice. Some of us are more compassionate oriented, and we're just going to save the drowning guy out of the river. Others of us have an ability to think through what is just and what is unjust. And if there's a factory upstream that's throwing people into the river, I'm going up there to stop that injustice. It's a difficult ethical question, and followers of Christ disagree how they answer it. I think both of those options are good and real.
How is it justice or even fair to have Adam and Eve be the reason that we came into the world with sin when we had nothing to do with them eating that?
You bet. Excellent question. Where's the fairness of people in Haiti not having the same opportunity you do, or in Africa? Ma'am, it's an unfair world we live in. It's a messed up world, but let's be real honest. There are consequences to our decisions. And there were consequences to Adam and Eve's rebellion against God. There were consequences of Cain murdering his brother Abel. There were consequences of the people at the time of Noah turning their backs on God, and God judged them with a flood. And there are consequences of goodness, of love. The Good Samaritan heals the Jew beaten up on a bloody road to Jericho. And there are consequences of a doctor performing good surgery after the doctor has studied harder than I would ever study to get through med school. So there are consequences to our actions. I'm free to do whatever I want, but I'm not free to escape the consequences. If I love the guy, it's going to benefit him. If I hate the guy, it's going to hurt him. So Adam and Eve made a horrible decision, but I've made the same decision. They decided to deify themselves, to deify their own opinion, and that's sin. It's just self-deification. It's relativism. Everything's relative. What does that mean? That means I define what's right and wrong. I define the purpose of my life. I define human value or lack thereof. I am the center. It's all about me. That is the heart of sin. It's exactly what Adam and Eve bought into, and it leads to horrible consequences.
If I had a house, right, and then I saw you on the side of the street and I forced you into my house to follow my commandments and stuff, and if you didn't follow it, then you would send yourself to hell or something, versus if you chose to come into my house knowing that you would have to follow, I mean, I don't know, just something like that.
I got you.
Like, would you say that it would make more sense that people who chose to come here to this earth, accepting that they would have to face grief and, tragedy, do you think that that could make a little bit more sense as to,
No, it would not make more sense. It would not make more sense because you didn't choose to be born, and I didn't choose to be born. We didn't choose to be born. You didn't choose to be born. You've been given the gift of life. I've been given the gift of life. Now we are responsible for what we do with this incredible gift called your life and my life. Stuart, what do you think?
Well, remember, so the promise is that we would have done every single thing that Adam and Eve would have done back in that day. So there's personal responsibility and corporate responsibility. Personal guilt as well as corporate guilt. We see this from a political level. Well, it's very similar to what Adam and Eve did and what we still continue to do, and how our very issues that we have bought into and the sin that we have done, unfortunately, poisons the community. So it makes a lot of sense. But we're dirty, rotten sinners, just like Adam and Eve were. We would have made the exact same mistakes. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you've taken an atheistic perspective on matters, well, then it wasn't really wrong what they did. It's not really wrong what we do, because there's no objective morality, and everything just flows naturally from evolution. That's why this atheist, who I brought up yesterday, who was at Oregon State, who would never have been here, obviously, 6'7", absolutely jacked, comes running at me saying, no, there's not such a thing as sin. There's not such a thing as evil and suffering. Those are such religious terms. Let's get rid of them. Everything is just normal. There's selective adaptation. There's maladaptation as well. Maladaptive things get in and poison things, he says. But you need to normalize it because there's no moral value behind them that causes them to be evil. All right, when he's confronted with what happened at the Catholic Church not too long ago with the kids who were shot, I don't think he's going to go to that church and say, maladaptive behavior, this poor guy, he was just confused, and nothing really wrong with what occurred. It's not really evil.
Close family relative. He's an agnostic. He was a believer previously, but he has a very strong belief now that God is selfish and that we are all made to exist for the sole purpose of serving him.
Okay, let's keep him real.
He also believes that nothing ever had to happen from the beginning of creation up to this point in time. And that includes that it was God's will that Lucifer turned and became the origin of evil. So my question is, how should I counteract that with a thought-provoking dialogue to both support?
Good question. Depends how well you know the guy. Then I would encourage you to tell him agnosticism is an intellectual option. I can stay in here and intellectually say, I'm agnostic. It's a practical impossibility. And that was one of the main points of the talk I just gave, right? Everybody worships. I don't know. Oh, yes, you do know. You know what gets you out of the bed in the morning. You know what you are going to invest your sweat equity in. You know what you're going to do with your money. You're not just going to drop it on the street. You're probably going to give it to a bank and probably going to learn how to invest it in stocks or in gold or whatever you're into. So please don't tell me you're just agnostic, you just don't know. No, you have a philosophy of life. Everybody has a philosophy of life. No, Cliff, I don't. All right, help me, Cliff, understand, what am I living for then? Well, it's real simple. Just ask first question. What do I sacrifice the most money, time, and effort to pursue? That's your idol. That's your God. Second question. Who or what writes the purpose of my life? That's your idol. That's your God. Third question. Who inspires you or what inspires you most? What motivates you most? What are you awestruck by? Oh, I'm awestruck by that athlete, by that musician, by that politician, by that whatever. That's your idol. And the next question would be, who grabs your focus? Who do you give your attention to most? That's your idol. And the final question is, and who writes your values? Who or what writes your philosophy of life? That's your God, that's your idol. So please don't tell me you're just agnostic, meaning by that, you just don't know. Oh, yes, you do know, because you dressed yourself a certain way this morning. You have priorities, because you conduct yourself in an articulate way. You know by examining your life carefully what your idol is. Stuart?
And we all have idols that are connected to money, sex, and power. See, this is the reason why I believe that the disciples and the early Jews who said the resurrection absolutely occurred, I don't believe they made it up, because nothing connected their story to money, sex, or power. And it's very similar to the idols of our heart, though, in a different way today. We're not worshiping typically gold statues, like the Israelites were called not to do in the Old Testament, but we are worshiping all forms of money, sex, and power. That could be through music, and so it's at a subconscious level. It could be through pornography. It could be through working to try and get up the socioeconomic ladder just to please my own self and to get a trophy wife. It could be any number of things. So to start to question those idols and then put God as number one in your life, that's what we need to be doing on a daily basis. Because those idols, whether it's from a conscious or subconscious level, I promise you they are coming at us every single day.
Why are people that are schizophrenic, experiencing psychosis, or otherwise severely mentally ill, seemingly the people who, when you talk to them, they identify as like being very religious and having these religious experiences? I think I just struggle with like sometimes separating mental health and spirituality.
Have you read The Three Christs of Ypsilanti? It's actually The Two Christs of Ypsilanti. All right, I would read the book or watch the movie. Richard Gere is in the movie, but I like the book more than the movie. So it's basically two schizophrenics, true story, who think that they are both Jesus Christ. And so what is this?
I've met people like that.
Okay, yeah, so have I. Actually, it's almost like everybody. This atheist said, just because these people think they're Jesus Christ, that's just cultural. It's just cultural Christianity, specific to the US. She is dead wrong. This is true cross-cultural. So even Muslims, oddly enough, when they go psychotic, it's typically they think they're Jesus Christ, not Muhammad. So I think that's some type of evidence actually for the Christian faith. Why is it Jesus that is traveling cross-culturally? Why does every single religion look favorably upon Jesus and no other figure? Every single religion does in different kinds of ways. So specifically with psychoses, when Jesus was going about exorcising demons, I think he was also healing schizophrenics. I don't think he was always just saying, hey, legion, look at endless amounts of demons here, let's cast them out and this person's better. No, in the Greek, there's one specific case scenario where we get kissed by the moon. When someone is going manic or has serious psychoses, oftentimes it's connected to a full moon. With the gravitational pull, psychiatrists don't know exactly why that is, but there's a case to it. How interesting, in the Greek, we get talk about Jesus being ahead of his time, a reference to being kissed by the moon, some of these who are supposedly possessed by demons. And so, yes, schizophrenics, a lot of psychoses connects with people who say, I am Jesus Christ, and I think there's a spiritual element in there, which is screaming, there is demonic presence. Because a person becomes so grandiose in saying, I am Christ, that I think the devil gets in there and sadly plays off of that physical pathology and malady, more so than if someone broke a left arm. So we have to leave room to say we don't know exactly what's going on, but I always say, hey, look, if therapy doesn't work, if coping skills like exercise, sociability, all these things don't work, then eventually address that it could be time for an exorcism. And I'm not very charismatic, but I still would say that, because I do think typically a spiritual element is involved. Now, you talked about religiosity. Religiosity is in the DSM as usually a symptom for most mental health disorders, and religiosity is always connected to Pharisees in the New Testament. How interesting. I think all the Pharisees had some type of mental health disorder. They were the ones going around always at the jot and tittle, saying you had to do this, that, and the other. It was an OCD form of psychosis, I think. It was always based out of their own pride and saying you have to follow every single one of the 613 commandments or you're going to hell. Or at least you're not spiritually mature. And so religiosity is in the DSM as well.
If people have tried other things, then you think it's time for an exorcism. Is there ever evidence of that removing demons?
Yeah, absolutely. Like peer-reviewed evidence, like in a scientific lab, I don't know of any. It's mainly anecdotal, but it's like thousands and millions. Like you go to Latin America, you go to Haiti, you go to Africa, like everybody's talking about exorcisms, and you see people get a lot better quite quickly. Well, why doesn't that happen as much in the US? Well, I'd say partly because we live in a very scientific age where we say science and medicine, that's all. And so we oftentimes don't try it. And then secondly, we usually discount it. So I think that gets into belief. Yeah. Some of it's placebo effect maybe even, right? I'm a big firm believer in placebo effect. If you believe something's working, things are going to get better. That's peer-reviewed studies for sure, right? There's peer-reviewed studies behind that. Then there's something called the nocebo effect, which is if I don't believe it's going to help, but I'm taking the right medication, Prozac for depression, there's a good chance that Prozac will not help. It's kind of like faith in Christ. If I'm praying and talking to Christ and Jesus says, if you have even just the smallest amount of faith, you can throw a mountain into the heart of the sea. I mean, that's a form of placebo effect based off of evidence though, right? Where you have to believe with your mind and your heart that you can do what Christ is asking or even telling you to do, and you'll be able to do some pretty incredible wonders as well as live out your calling in life. But if you always think, no, I'm always a doubting Thomas, no, Jesus can't use me in that way, well, it's the nocebo effect. Sure, that's going to be a serious weight on your ankle.
Faith is based in evidence.
Yeah.
And like you just said, you were talking about anecdotal evidence. If all of the evidence for Jesus and God is anecdotal, how can we trust that? Because if you look back throughout history, when we rely only on stories that other humans have told, there's a lot left out, or a completely different story is actually the truth. Like, for example, what happened with Christopher Columbus. A lot of people, touted him as a hero, but then as time has gone on and we've looked into what really happened from like other people's accounts, it's come to be known that he and his men did a lot of harm, like physical harm to people and mental harm as well.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, like someone told me that there was 500 witnesses of Jesus. What if someone just wrote that down and decided to tell that story But did each one of the 500 people write it down, or did one person just like exaggerate, and said 500 people, and then people decided to go with that because they were considered a reliable source? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, how do I know that those people back then that witnessed Jesus weren't just mentally ill?
All of them mentally ill?
Well, maybe it was like a group of a small amount.
But we know psychologically you can't have group hallucination of something like a resurrection. It would have to be single hallucination. Not everybody was hallucinating when they encountered the risen Jesus Christ. Medically that doesn't happen, right? Group hallucinations.
I just don't understand how we can trust that is the truth. Like, history books aren't necessarily true.
What is the movie Tom Hanks is in where he gets the picture with the president and it turns out to be totally falsifiable? I mean, thank you, Forrest Gump. Everything can be completely falsified with a picture. We see it with AI in this day and age. I would trust eyewitness testimony, which is still considered the top line of evidence in the court of law, way before a picture. Like, way before. I would trust DNA evidence way before a picture. And so what you get in the Gospels is eyewitness testimony. And so any good detective, any good lawyer is going straight to eyewitness testimony before any form of picture or anything like that. And so what you have in the Gospels is eyewitness reportage, testimony, not eyewitness legend that somehow springs up over time. No, historically speaking, you have footnotes even within the Gospels. Talk to Malchus, talk to Alexander and Rufus, talk to all these different people who are named because they were well known in the community. Go to them and see if this really happened. Or Paul saying to Agrippa, for example, these things didn't happen in a corner. Check out the evidence with the resurrection. So you have all these people who are evidentialists. They're not saying gullibly blindly believe. They're saying go check it out yourself. Theophilus, for example, getting told by the doctor Luke, well known in the community. He's saying these aren't cleverly invented stories. I checked them out myself. Now you go check them out. Don't just trust me and my word for it. Or John at the end of the Gospel of John. Hey, I've written about a lot of things, checked a lot of things out. There could be endless amounts of books that are filled up by the evidence and things that Jesus actually did. But I don't have all the time in the world to talk about every single story. And so eyewitness testimony led to a type of oral tradition where we know that the spoken word, memorization of things like parables, of things like the way Jesus spoke, iambic pentameter, I think it's called, all these different things, the way he spoke, that was carried on in a very judicious way that had a ton of credibility behind it. And then when the disciples started to die off, that's when they had to put pen to paper.
When I was raised, my parents are like, oh, the Bible is basically just like another novel, like like a fiction book. Like,
you can say it's wrong, history, but it's not written as fiction. One of the greatest authors and literary critics in our time, C.S. Lewis, said that. He said, you can't look at the Gospels and say, oh, it's fiction. No, it won't let you do that. It's written as history. Now, you can say it's wrong history, but you can't say it's Aesop's fables because it's written in an entirely different way. It's written about a historical figure making historical claims, historically falsifiable, to say if you can prove that the resurrection didn't happen, well, then obviously the entire faith breaks down. Paul says that in numerous places. He says we are to be pitied the most. He said that we are completely foolish and ridiculous in our thinking of faith and who Jesus is if the resurrection didn't occur. So I would ask your parents to check out the resurrection, and then I'd really press them on, all right, Mom and Dad, this is all just made up. How historically then, throw out the Bible, throw out all the historical documentation that, by the way, if there wasn't a supernatural element to it, every great historian says that there's more reliability and evidence for things like who Jesus is and his resurrection, bar none, than any other ancient history. Way more evidence for it. But there's a supernatural element, so you got to discount it. Okay, that's embarrassing. That's holding a level of skepticism that I think is too stringent, too strong. You have to come to a historical document and say, I'm completely open. Yes, there's a supernatural element, so I'm going to have one eyebrow up a little bit, but I'm not just going to throw it out. No, if I believe that there could be a God who created this whole place, then I could certainly believe that if he graced this planet, he could be raised from the dead. I mean, he's God. He created this whole place. He created every single human being. He certainly has control of whether a life is in the ground, dead, or alive. And so I'd press your parents on, Mom and Dad, I'm sorry, that's just completely wrong to think it's fiction, but you could be right if it's made up history. But then, finally, okay, if it's made up history, you need to tell me then why almost 2/3 of the entire Roman Empire were hoodwinked overnight. Why thousands upon thousands of Jews became Christians, who would be the last ones to become Christians on the planet, overnight, and then were willing to die for that faith.